welcome to another episode of the CPG Guys podcast. Our hosts, Sri Rajgopalan, Peter V.S. Bond, and Brian Gildenberg explore how brands and retailers engage consumers in an increasingly digitally driven world. And now, here are the CPG Guys.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the CPG Guys podcast. I'm Sri, your co-founder, co-host of the CPG Guys, also co-founder and partner of Think Blue, your key to unlocking your profitability potential. As builders, connectors, and amplifiers, we shape the future of commerce to drive your growth. Please do listen to my older daughter Ria Raj's music at www.riaraj.com. That's RHEARAJ.com. And my younger daughter Lara Raj is a member of the Geffen Records Universal Music Group Cat's Eye, whose Netflix docu-series on the making of the band is set to release late this summer. While my wife Kavita Raj's own podcast Lights, Camera, Convo on iHeartRadio and all streaming platforms. Not joining me today is Peter V.S. Bond. At the time of this recording, is away in Japan with his daughter at Disneyland. And when he's not co-hosting this podcast, he serves as Partnership Acceleration Lead at Flywheel, a division of Omnicom that helps enterprise brands improve their SEO and SEM, growing their e-commerce businesses. Before we get to our guests, we want to ask you to help spread the word about this community we've created in the CPG Guys. Beyond sharing our podcast with your friends, which we're thankful that you already do, if you're using Apple Podcasts or Spotify as your preferred listening platform, please leave us a rating, as it helps feed the algorithm that makes us more findable by CPG retail people like you looking for education as well as entertainment. But more importantly, the rating also tells us how we're doing, and the review actually tells us whether we're having the right conversations and we're bringing the right guests on. We're happy that the CPG Guys is part of an impressive collective of highly rated podcasts, including CPG Scoop with Risa and Jennifer, and the FMCG Guys with Daniel, Efrain, and Christine. Links to our podcast, our sister cast, and the social media profiles of my daughters Ria and Lara, my wife's podcast, may be found in the digital liner notes of this episode. Needless to say, the last 4 years have seen a whirlwind change in retail media across the board. I'm talking 75 plus retail media networks in the US alone. Leave alone Europe and Asia, there's probably closer to 300 or 400 of them. Huge media budget shifts to sales and lower funnel, but yet in-store media not penetrated at all. In Europe, in-store media has been RMN for quite a while. We thought, why not learn more about international RMN, how the approach is, and what the focus may be. So we decided to bring in long-term media leader and deep expert Paul Wright, none other than the head of Uber Ads for International, to school us. So let's get this conversation going. Please join me in welcoming the show, as I said, head of Uber Ads International, Paul Wright. Paul, welcome to the CPG Guys. How you doing?
Thank you. No, I'm doing great. Great to be here.
Paul, before we get started with our Q&A segment here, can you give us a quick overview of your current role and remit as head of Uber Ads International?
Yeah, so as you know, we set up Uber Ads a few years ago. We now have expanded across multiple markets, over 30 markets now, and the international role I have basically looks after the EMEA markets and the APAC markets that we're set up in. So it ranges from Australia through Japan, through to the European markets that we operate within as both Uber and Uber Rides, Uber Eats and Uber Rides.
Of course, you're part of Uber, so at some point we're going to talk about the synergy between Uber, Uber Eats, the ads, things of that nature. But thank you for that overview. And the digital liner notes of this episode will include links to your LinkedIn profile and Uber International companies, as well as LinkedIn pages for our listeners to access while we go on with our conversation. So here we are. Your career, of course, passes through media. Media's who's what I'd say: Apple, Amazon, Omnicom, Ad TV. You've owned companies. You've been a CEO in the space. And boy, I even noticed ethical ad tech company, which I'm very curious to learn what that means. Take us through the years and how you got to Uber International.
Yeah, so I started my career at Sky in the UK when it first launched. Now, you've got to remember, for those international audiences don't know much about Sky, at the time, there were only 4 TV channels in the UK. And Sky came along and doubled it to 8, which was a big dramatic moment, one that people were very impressed by. It's now obviously in the hundreds. And it had come out of a cable channel called Sky Channel, which Rupert Murdoch had bought, and then he invested into Sky and became Sky. And I stayed there. I was employee like 144 or something, so quite early on. And I was just a trainee. I was like learning the ads business at that sort of bottom level, but in a very fast startup. And it was a great startup. It was a startup of the 90s rather than the dot-com startups of later. That worked. I mean, it's an amazing story. Nearly went, it lost a lot of money at one stage. It merged with its competitors. It reformatted things. It came along with pay TV sports in the UK, which had not happened before. So they became obviously the first partners of the Premier League. So that was a big moment. And then evolved into this very smart company that I think was quite revolutionary in the sense of TV companies because it had a very long-term view of the business. But ultimately, advertising was part of what they did rather than the biggest part of what they did. And it's sort of a retail media play, actually, if you think about it, because they're retailing media to people, as in selling them channels and packages. And advertising was a secondary revenue stream, but a very profitable one. So I learned my trade there, then went to a startup which raised $100 million and went bust in 2 years, which even by today's standards is quite a lot of money to lose in that period of time. It was an enjoyable moment for learning, not for anything else. We managed to go bust on the first day of the World Cup, and we were a sports content business. So the timing couldn't have been better, I suppose. If you're going to go out in style. Learned a lot from that. It was the start of the dot-com boom, so there's some crazy business models being floated. Then I set up my first business, which was a vertical ad network focusing on sport. So we worked with rights holders like Premier League football clubs and the Premier League and a bunch of other people in the sports sector, helping them monetize their websites as it was. And that was fun. We grew it. It was a UK only business. We grew it to, reasonable several $1 million business. And then we sold it to Sky, ironically, when James Murdoch was the CEO. Went back to Sky for a couple of years and helped them run their first digital ad sales business. Then did a bunch of other things, sold another startup with a friend of mine that he set up in the video space, and then carried on doing other work as we went through and ended up at Omnicom running digital for Omnicom. Now, this was a time where I guess Facebook was becoming quite a serious player because they'd moved from being a sort of managed service into being a more automated self-serve business. And that was quite a dramatic change for people. They were like the darlings of the industry. So this was like 2011-ish or so. And that was great to see that happen, as well as, it was changing. We'd obviously been Google-dominated business before, and then you had Facebook come in and change some things again. Did that for a couple of years, learned a lot. I haven't been buy-side much of my career, mostly sell-side. So that was really interesting to learn that sort of side of the business. And then got headhunted to go and work for Apple to run Apple's first ad business, not their current ad business. The first ad business was called iAd. For those who don't know it, it was an acquisition that Steve Jobs made about a year before he died. He bought a company called Quattro Wireless. They were one of the first mobile ad networks, and we basically took that on and then turned it into iAd as it was then. iAd ran for about 3 or 4. Well, I did 3.5, 4 years there, and then they decided that was closed down, and then they focused on Apple search ads, which is now what they do. Then I went to a company, which was, as a CEO, this is a fun one, where it was a DSP essentially, but it had been invested in by a range of people. And we started working on this idea that there was a degree of ethics needed within ad tech because there was a lot of money disappearing to various players, but it wasn't really helping the advertiser. So we were a transparent DSP. I did that for a couple of years, reset it because there were some challenges with the business that we had to reset. And then I took a bit of a break and then ended up at Seismic, which was the ad serving technology for a load of companies, as well as a demand-side platform, as well as a data platform. That business ended up shortly after I joined, although it wasn't to do with me, I hasten to add, in bankruptcy. And then we ended up being part of the sales team, the team that sold it to Amazon. So Amazon incorporated it into their ad tech stack. So once I'd done that, I was part of the ad tech team for a few years there. And then after I left there, short term in another place, and then ended up at Uber. So that's the short history of me.
Very interesting, very thorough. So we're going to have an awesome debate today on media, hopefully, especially retail media. So You gave a pretty colorful commentary of the many great companies you've had the chance to touch. You gave an example also of a failed startup, $100 million of equity. Very few acknowledge that failure is an important, necessary learning experience to improve the self. All of us have had those experiences. We just want to tell the story. I applaud you for saying it. But with such a wealthy experience over multiple decades, you talked about when the UK had four channels on Sky. I remember in the 70s growing up as a child, when India introduced Doordarshan and live TV for the first time, it was 3 hours, one channel from 6:20 p.m. to 9:20. I have no idea why it was 6:20 to 9:20, but the most fun part of that was the live news from 9 to 9:20 p.m. I couldn't miss seeing that. But the big question, Paul, is those decades of experience in the different big companies you've touched, what's changed over the years? Did Armans exist in Europe like a decade ago and international well before they got to the US? Because Armans really become a phenomenon here in the US over COVID. I mean, they existed, but they became a phenomenon the last 4 years.
Well, yeah, I actually think they did exist. I mean, if you look at the Tesco story and the dunnhumby story, that was a long time in the making, because dunnhumby came up with this whole thing about data being the key driver for interactions with customers, and that led to the Tesco Club Card and all the loyalty programs which now exist in the UK. And they were combining some of that data with media. I think the thing about retail media this current phase is it seems to have jumped predominantly on the digital because of the lockdown. But I think those retail media networks existed before, just maybe not perhaps so prominent within the media ecosystem. And I think this is also to do with agencies as well. Previously, a lot of the retail media transactions were done direct between the supplier, the CPG, and the retailer. And you know this from your experience, right? Now with agencies and with digital, there's a lot more, there's more people in the game, I suppose, and hence the reason perhaps it's got a bit more coverage. But certainly a lot of what was being, I think a lot of what's been learned from dunnhumby was actually pushed out to a lot of other businesses across the globe, because they worked with many companies. There's a bit of a joke in the UK retail media scene that every time you go to a retail media conference, it is basically a dunnhumby, ex-dunnhumby get together, because they have created a lot of the people, they set up a lot of the people on their journey on that area. So yeah, I think it's been around a while, morphed into something more digitally focused perhaps, and then more people have got involved in it.
Thank you for that, Paul. So having spent time at Who's in Advertising, give us a quick overview of what's going on. This has got nothing to do with Uber, but I thought I'd ask anyway. Maybe it does. You're going to tell us. Give us an overview of in-store media and why it's already considered a retail media network in Europe, because in US it's not today.
Why in-store is included is, it's
retail media.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about retail media, I mean, look, I think we've always understood, the UK has always understood, I think the UK in particular is very true of this. It's like, it's always sort of understood the relationship between brand placement and transaction and stuff like that. And I think that's come back to what we were saying in terms of the data attraction. So that's where we are. I mean, that's how it is. And then I think that it has just evolved and grown.
So, Paul, would it be fair to say that if you think back to retail media, the origins of retail media really were in store for you in the UK?
Yes.
That's why you said it's always been that way. It's just bizarre that in the US we flipped it on its head and said websites matter first, then offsite placements matter. And now we're scrambling to try and figure out.
Yeah, which is odd, right?
The in-store component, because I've always figured, Paul, look, I mean, a display that's built on an end cap, hundreds and thousands of people pass by, but like a small fractional percentage buy that product from the end cap. So at the end of the day, I'm not saying end caps don't drive sales, they 100% do. But at the end of the day, that's traffic and it's audience more than it is a sale. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. When we think about retail media, I think it's just that we evolve very quickly in this whole in-store experience and recognizing that placements of display units or whatever would have an impact on consumer behavior. And then I guess with the launch of loyalty cards and the loyalty programs, you then started linking that to transaction data. And then when the online came along, it was just another extension of it, rather than perhaps what's obviously what you were talking about in the US, which is slightly more digital centric and moving across. So yeah, but I think that it goes back to what I was saying earlier. The interesting thing, or even when I was agency side, was that the retail media, that initial transactional media that was happening, agencies were not very heavily involved at all. And now, obviously, with the likes of Omnicom and all the other companies getting involved in it, it's a very different transaction. But it was basically client through to retailer, working out how they could improve sales and experience for the consumer.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense. I want to jump into Uber advertising for international markets. So can you take us through what countries? Because arguably Uber is a worldwide network, but not in specific countries. So what countries, what offerings, how do people engage with you? How do people find you in specific countries?
Yeah, so, I mean, overall, I think we're active in over 30 countries now. We have dedicated teams in some countries, not in all. Just depends on the offering. And if you think about our offering, there's sort of three core pillars to it. Pillar one is what we do with our restaurant partners, which is it's based around our sponsored listings product, self-serve, those types of things, which is where we started. Then we have what we do with the CPG brands, which is a combination of various services, all the way through what you can do in rides from a brand awareness point of view, down into transactional sponsored items, products, those types of things. And then what we have in our rides business in the main, which is for our non-endemic brands who want to do brand awareness. And if you think about our business, we have those two sides to it, but they are linked. So we have a lot of CPG brands actually doing all of those services, and that's where it works. And then we have dedicated teams based around those skill sets, because that's important for us to understand the consumer, our consumer, which is an advertiser in this case, and make sure we get the right solutions. Some of those things are very retail media focused. Some are more brand focused, but that's fine. We have that sort of wonderful ecosystem. And then in terms of core teams, we have teams in London, Paris, Madrid in Europe, and then in Sydney, Taipei, and Japan and Tokyo. Those are where the core ads teams are, and then there are other teams that work on it as well. And it's obviously been a great growth story. It's been one that Dara, our CEO, committed to a while back. We launched officially back in sort of 22 and has been growing ever since. And we've made public statements about where we expect it to get to. And the great thing is, I think, and when you think about this, it's interesting, because we're not a content business, much like other retail media, but in a sort of slightly different way, the consumer reaction to advertising is actually not as positive, and that's important. We don't want to, two things, we don't want to interrupt the user experience within this, but we want to provide a benefit to consumer if advertising is in there. And that seems to have gone very well so far. So I think we're still early stages. We've just got a long way to go. The international teams are probably younger in terms of their time on the ground than the US teams, but we're learning a lot from the US and obviously applying that to how we roll out. And I think the CPG businesses that we work with are very much leaning into what we have to offer because they think it's very interesting.
So from a consumer perspective, right, you use the word retail media on Uber Ads. Why is Uber Ads a retail media engine? Is it because when they're actually using the Uber app or the Uber Eats app, an ad pops up and it's actually an app and therefore they're buying something and therefore it's a retailer? Yeah,
we're acting as a retailer in that context, aren't we? We're working with the retailer in that way. Our marketplace is helping that retailer sell that product. So we have it's not a pure, I guess it's not, just what you do with one retailer, because someone goes onto Uber Eats and about 60% who go there don't exactly know what they're going to order when they go on. They just know that they've decided that they want a delivery of some nature. And I think when you think about delivery media, that's what we do. And then they'll choose whether it's a local store they want to get some groceries from, whether it's Papa John's, whether it's whichever brand that they want to engage with. And I guess when we think about it, a lot of what we do with ads is signposting. It's signposting to users. Well, these are things that are near you, or these are products. When you go into menu items, these are products that you may want to buy and add to your basket. And I remember talking to a lot of the CPG brands recently in various markets, and one of their concerns has been, I think, in the delivery world, how do they get their attachment rates up? because attachment rates in delivery for them sometimes are lower than they would expect in a sort of, physical environment. So that's also a point. So yeah, I mean, I think we're sort of unusual in the sense we're aggregating across multiple suppliers, but then the user can make the choices, and we use advertising to be the signpost for that.
Got it. A reminder to our audience, I'm speaking to Paul Wright, head of international ads at Uber. Paul, on the measurement side, how evolved is your international measurements? Are there standards and guidelines you follow? Do you work with the IAB? What can a advertiser expect back in return from you from a measurement perspective?
So a combination of things. I mean, I think we do work with the IAB. We sit on retail media councils and stuff and work on the standardization, which I think is a really important part of the process, particularly in international markets where there's a very big focus on that measurement piece. And then within that, we have a bunch of measurements from, clicks, transactions to ROAS to brand lift to all those things that we can look at. So, and we keep on evolving it. Brand lift studies certainly is an interesting one. Transactional value as well. So there's a lot there. We still got a long way to go because I think we need to keep on understanding our audience and understanding the advertiser need. But so far so good. I think that what we've provided so far, people have responded well to the impact that the advertising is having, either from a direct ROAS point of view or from a brand favorability study or whatever else you need to do. And I think when we think of Uber, I think the team, myself and the team, always think that we've got to be we've got to provide standard metrics that advertisers are looking for in every platform, rather than come up with anything different or unique, because it's really important that we have that consistency, and that's what advertisers tell us daily.
True. Can you talk about any partnership with the IAB? Have you guys been speaking with the IAB on standardization? And then when you go apples to apples against some of the grocery retail media networks, true grocery like Tesco, etc., do you end up going apples to apples from a measurement perspectives, or are your metrics different because the type of service you have is different?
Yeah, so with the IAB, we're members of the IAB in various markets. The UK, let me take the UK as a good example. So we sit on the retail media group there, and we work on standardization there. So, we're working on what is going to be the standards going forward and how we should develop that. I would say that, I think when people look at us, they probably look at us slightly differently to the way that they would look at a traditional retailer. Because with that retailer, if you take a Tesco's in the UK or a Carrefour or whatever, you're looking at offline and online. And therefore, and as we said earlier, there's obviously a greater heritage of that. Whereas with us, I think what we tend to find is that there's teams focused on delivery organizations like ourselves, and therefore are looking more from a sort of e-commerce perspective, a pure e-commerce perspective, rather than from a wider perspective. And that's fine. And I don't think, I'm not aware that we get sort of necessarily put in the same category all the time as those other retailers. But if you're a CPG, we are part of the ecosystem that they want to engage with. Because I'm sure the conversations that a Mars has with a big retailer are very different to the ones we have, where we've got a variety of services and opportunities, but they're not quite the same as a pure retailer in that sense.
To me, you guys would be much more lower funnel because you're way down the transactional funnel already, because they've come to you with the intent of buying, not necessarily browsing, especially when they're either mobile on Uber, or they've already made a decision to get some food, as you mentioned up front. They may not know exactly what type of food and from where, but they've come with the intent of ordering something. So you might have a very high value from a lower funnel penetration perspective, but a less value from an upper funnel exposure perspective. So, but I want to jump to Asian markets and European markets back in there at this point. So I'd love to learn the difference, like what makes Uber advertising attractive to brands in Asia versus Western Europe? You mentioned, I think, 3 markets where you actually have ad teams, but can you tell us about the coverage of Asian markets?
Yeah, the coverage of Asia, the 3 key markets are the ones we just talked about. So Australia, Taiwan, and Japan, those are critical markets. I think when you think about delivery in particular, it is very different in every market. It isn't just, there's different cultural elements. There's all sorts of things that make a difference. But when we think about our business, we're not just thinking about that. We're also thinking about what is our Rise business. So go back to your point about lower funnel. I actually think the Rise business actually gives us a whole opportunity middle to upper funnel that can drive all the way through to lower funnel. We've started to see that. So we do have brands who will buy Uber Rise experiences because they're high engagement ad units that then link into transaction later. And what we see, I think, in APAC versus Europe is not massive differences, really. Advertisers are engaged in the same ways. It's more the local nuance of each market that is the difference rather than necessarily the way people approach this. And I think one of the things that's super interesting to me from our perspective is I think global brands like working with global platforms. You know that from your experience. So if you are a big global CPG, then the ability to work with us in multiple markets is very appealing in that sense. And I think we certainly benefit from that. Whereas sometimes, particularly in retail media networks, I have talked to some who say the challenge they have is they're only in one market, and being in one market means you're pretty much limited to a sort of slightly smaller conversation potentially with those brands. So yeah, I mean, we're building out, we're growing in those markets, but as I said, every market's very different, and it's a sort of interesting, and we'll keep growing because that's the nature of the way we operate. So we keep on growing those markets as we can.
Got it, Paul. It's pretty straightforward there. And so now I've got the question that is on everyone's mind listening to this episode, which is the integration between Uber Eats and Uber itself. How do the two of you work together to deliver for brands? Are there joint campaigns you can run at the same time? And also take us through a little bit of the DNA of how a campaign on Uber, the mobility platform, works.
So I think there's several things. Firstly, we're a team. We work across all of the organization within Uber. So whether it's the Rise team or the Eats team, so that's the first thing. It's it's an important part of what we do. When we look at mobility first, the mobility ad units are very unique because what we've done is essentially insert an ad into your Uber Rides experience into existing formats. So we're not actually changing your experience, we're adding an ad into that experience. So if you're going to an airport, you will see there are 3 stages of the ad unit. The first stage is when you're waiting for the car to be confirmed. That is a largest unit. It's swipeable but non-clickable. The reason it's non-clickable, you don't want to click out and then lose your ride because you haven't got a ride confirmed. Once the ride is confirmed and is on its way to you, there's a smaller unit that drops down halfway down the screen. That is clickable. And then finally, when you're in the car and you're going back to check how long it's going to take you to get to your destination, there is another unit which is also clickable. Now, these units are very interesting because what we're seeing is we're sending one advertiser per ride. So there is no clutter. You own the ride. So if you want someone going to an airport or if you want someone going to a Taylor Swift concert, we can be very, very clear and specific about it. The data points are obviously pretty accurate as well, because by definition, someone's going to say exactly where they want to go to rather than, there's no guesswork. And lots of location-based marketing has always been a bit of guesswork. There is no guesswork with us. If you're going to Heathrow, you're going to Heathrow. If you're going to JFK, you're going to JFK. And we even probably know which terminal you're going to. So that data and that setup is very, very powerful to advertisers. And what we're seeing is time spent in the ad units is about 100 seconds plus. So no distractions, 100 seconds of engagement with your ad unit. Now, the beauty then is you can link either out of app into, if you're a music, thing, you can link to Spotify or whatever else you want to do, or you can link directly into Uber Eats. And that's what we're seeing people, we did some work with Unilever on their launch of Magnum, where we had a video ad in the Rides app linking through into transactional opportunities within Uber Eats. And we think that's very powerful. That's an area that we want to work. We will work more on as we continue to grow this business. And I think this is the thing in a very cluttered ad world with how many ad units out there anyway. Standout is difficult to achieve, and we can achieve it within the app and within the transaction, and that works extremely well for a lot of brands. And you can do, and from a retail point of view, there are two things you can do. Obviously, direct into eats. The other thing is you can do add to wallet transactional opportunities that then go to POS. And we've seen some brands do that. So L'Oreal have been doing some stuff with us in the UK and France and the Netherlands, where they've been allowing us, well, creating an add to wallet feature so that when you go through duty free at various airports, you can redeem a free gift or a discount. And we think that's a big area for this, because that again, with that point you were making about intent, when someone's on Uber Eats, there's intent. When someone's in a car, in an Uber, there's intent in their journey as well. And in some cases, we know what that is. They're going to a bar, they're going to a restaurant, they're going to an airport. All those that's built-in intent, I guess.
I like diptyque order parfums. And one of the only places in the world I can buy it is the Heathrow Airport, either Terminal 3 or 5, more Terminal 5 than 3 because there's fewer shops in 3. How do I get so should I open up my Uber app when I'm in the airport next time and look for something for duty-free? Because I'm not kidding, Paul. It's one of the only places in the world.
Well, I will get diptyque to advertise.
I'm just kidding, Paul. Of course, I'm talking fragrance here when you're talking about Bev.
My daughter works at the place where she does some sales of diptyque as well, so it's fine.
We're gonna have to follow up offline. And so, Paul, the last question we always ask here is what's next, right? So in terms of retail media, omni-channel marketing, digital advertising, digital marketing, call it what you may, what trends are you following and coaching the industry on? Is there an adoption curve? We're at the edge of. What is Uber Ads International on the cutting edge of? And how do you work back with your peers in the US, especially Megan, I think, has your role in the US. Do you guys communicate a lot? Are you trying to build ad units together, inventory together?
Yeah, Megan and I spend a lot of time working together on everything we do for Uber Ads because she runs the Americas. So, what's coming? Well, I think the obvious area is we are diving deeper into this attention world, because I think in a world, as I said, this cluttered world, how do you get attention from advertising? And that applies not only in both sides of the app, both the Rides app and the Eats app, because attention is going to be important. I think measurement continues to be important, and we have to evolve. We will keep on evolving measurement. Formats become interesting as well. I think with video, which has been pretty much launched recently in international markets, it's been around in the US for a bit longer, but we're now getting there. And how do you engage with video? And I guess the other area that we're emerging on, we've just done a deal with T-Mobile to expand our in-screen apps within cars in the US initially. And that's where you go into an Uber and then there's a big screen on the back of the headrest. And it will say, hey, welcome, here's your journey, wherever you're going. And you get engagement there, because we've always thought that there's a opportunity for engagement within car as well. And that could be, again, a retail experience or a POS experience or whatever. It doesn't matter. So that's an area we're looking at. And then I think, we're committed to looking at whatever we think is appropriate going forward, with still the core basis that obviously it's got to work within our app and it's got to work for the consumer. But, it's been a heck of a run so far, and there's a lot more to come, I think, from us as we start looking at other ad units and ones that, CPG brands are asking us for and we're developing for them.
How awesome. Let me remind our audience that you can find all of our content by simply going to a web browser and typing cpgguys.com as the URL. If you think you or your company has thought leadership to contribute to a community discussion, drop us an email at contact@cpgguys.com. Again, that email is contact@cpgguys.com, and maybe you can join us on the podcast just like Paul did today. Don't forget to drop us a rating at cpgguys.com in the navigation bar up top. As I mentioned before, the rating tells us how we're doing. The review tells us, are we having the right conversations with the right guests? Thank you to our LinkedIn followers. Without you, this program doesn't exist. all your clicks, likes, comments, DMs, meetups at conferences. Peter and I sincerely appreciate it. It makes a difference. And that's why at the time of this recording, we were about to embark on our 400th episode, which is only a few weeks away. When we release this recording, we'll be closer to 410. That wouldn't exist without you. Paul, I thank you so much for joining me on a Friday late afternoon for you in the UK.
Thank you.
Pleasure to have you on CPG Guys.
A pleasure. Thank you for your time.
That's a wrap of this episode. See you soon on another episode of, wait for it, Paul, the CPG Guys.
The content in this podcast episode is provided for general informational purposes only. By listening to our episode, you understand that no information contained in this episode should be construed as advice from CPG Guys LLC or the individual author, hosts, or guests, nor is it intended to be a substitute for research on any subject matter. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by CPG Guys LLC. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. The views expressed by CPG Guys LLC do not represent the views of their employers or the entity they represent. CPG Guys LLC expressly disclaims any and all liability or responsibility for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, consequential, or other damages arising out of any individual's use of, reference to, or inability to use this podcast or the information we present in this podcast.